You think you know the desert, but you don't know the things out there wearing someone else's skin. These 3 disturbing Skinwalker horror stories are based on real events involving a priest, a lone gold prospector, and a woman just trying to get home. First, a priest answering a late-night call for help encounters a presence beneath the floorboards that has stolen his voice to mock the word of God. Next, a solo gold prospector finds out the hard way that his new companion has a physical flaw no living creature should have. And finally, a real estate agent's drive home turns into a nightmare when she's pursued by a predator that leaves a 5-fingered handprint on her glass. You can lock your doors, but you can't lock out something that's already invited itself in. If you want to survive the night, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. The northern Arizona territory Father Ortiz served was a place of stark beauty, but it hid an old, unforgiving fear. He was a man of faith, clutching his rosary for decades, yet he knew the shadows clinging to the Navajo Nation often required more than a passing prayer. In this part of the world, some spirits were not easily dismissed. At 10:30 p.m., the rectory telephone rang sharp against the desert silence. It was the Sosi family, living 18 miles outside Chinle in deep isolation. Their voices were thin with terror. They didn't ask for a visit or a prayer circle. They demanded a witness. Father Ortiz drove into the black night, arriving at 11:15. The headlights revealed a stomach-turning scene. The family huddled in the dirt, wrapped in blankets, refusing to cross their own threshold. They looked fragile against the vast night sky. Their complaint was simple but impossible. For 6 nights, they had heard voices. Not the wind nor settling wood, but prayers, sermons and litanies drifting up from the crawl space beneath the floorboards. And the voice, they insisted, was familiar. Holding his worn Bible and a bottle of holy water, the 52-year-old priest walked past the terrified family. He entered the quiet, low-lit house alone. The air inside was stale, heavy with the tension of held breath. He walked to the center of the living room, where a small, square vent cut into the floor led to the dirt cavity below. He knelt beside the metal grate and closed his eyes. At first, there was only silence. Then the blood drained from his face. The small hairs on his neck stood up in a prickly wave. A man's voice was speaking from the deep, dusty cavity. It was clear, resonant, and calm. It was his own voice. Father Ortiz sat frozen. He listened, bewildered as the thing beneath him spoke. It wasn't a generic imitation. It had the exact pitch, the measured cadence he had cultivated in the seminary, even the slight lisp on his S sounds. It was a perfect sonic mirror. The voice was reciting the exact sermon Father Ortiz had delivered at 9 a.m. Mass that morning. He recognized every inflection, every dramatic pause. It was a violation of his identity, a theft of the tool he used to serve God. But then, the chilling truth peeled away his sanity. Leaning closer to the vent, heart hammering, he realized the pattern was wrong. The voice under the floor was speaking the sermon backward. The sacred words were being played in reverse with agonizing clarity. The message of hope was twisted into gibberish. Amen. You bless may God, us on peace, his and Father, thee of grace, thee. It was a nauseating, dizzying mockery. His brain, seeking order, registered a terrifying error. This wasn't a recording. It was a deliberate, real-time corruption of his most holy act. He stood up, legs weak, and slammed his hand on the latch of the crawlspace hatch nearby. He had to see. He wrenched the door open and aimed his flashlight into the black void. The beam cut the gloom, illuminating packed dirt and beams draped in gray cobwebs. The space was utterly empty. No speaker, no prankster. The voice didn't stop. It grew louder, switching immediately to the Lord's Prayer, but again, backward. Evil from us deliver, but us temptation into not lead, and Ortiz knew if he fled now, the thing would follow. It had claimed his voice. Running would surrender his faith. Clutching his Bible until his knuckles turned white, he raised his voice. He began to recite the Lord's Prayer forward, challenging the presence in a desperate verbal duel. Our Father, who art in heaven. The thing matched his speed instantly. As Ortiz spoke forward, the thing twisted the words backward, creating a dizzying internal echo. The air felt thick, pressing down like water. The two voices, one living, one hateful, swirled in a chaotic harmony that made Ortiz lose his balance. Then, the narrative shifted from a duel of words to physical confrontation. The prayer from the dark stopped on the final word. Silence slammed back into the room. Then, a new sound began. A heavy dragging noise on the packed dirt. Scrape, drag, scrape. It was loud, wet, and rhythmic. Something enormous pulling itself across the crawl space, moving directly toward the square of light. Then came the claws. Hard, sharp points scratching deeply into the rough wooden beams just feet from the opening. The sound was visceral, conveying an overwhelming helplessness. It was coming for him. Breath ragged, Ortiz held the light steady. He waited for a wolf, a coyote, or a man, but the shape never entered the beam. Instead, 2 points of light ignited in the deep darkness, 8 feet back. Amber eyes. They burned with an internal, terrible fire like coals in a furnace, and they were too high. The angle meant the thing staring back was not crawling on its belly. It was hunched over, a tall, twisted human form compressed into the tight darkness. Then, the final, most personal violation occurred. The monster dropped the mimicry. It abandoned Ortiz's voice and the backward prayers. A new voice drifted out, low, guttural, a moist rasp like dry leaves on stone. It spoke a single sentence, using a private childhood name only his dead mother had ever used. A name that stripped away his priesthood, leaving him a frightened child. You shouldn't have come here, Miguel. The priest didn't scream. Survival instinct took over. He slammed the hatch with sickening violence, blessed the seal with a shaking hand, and bolted. He ran past the waiting family, jumped in his truck, and sped away into the darkness. The Sosi family, bound to the land by poverty, had no choice but to stay. They couldn't afford to leave. But strangely, they never heard the voice again. The crawlspace remained silent. The entity, it seemed, was finished with them. Father Ortiz was found 2 days later, sitting in the front pew of his own church, staring blankly at the crucifix. He was alive, but he was gone. He remains in a semi-vegetative state to this day, a hollow shell who never speaks and rarely blinks. The official diocese report calls it a nervous breakdown brought on by exhaustion, but the elders in the community whisper a darker theory. They look at the priest's empty eyes, and they wonder if the exorcism actually worked. They wonder if the man sitting in that pew is Father Ortiz at all, or if the thing from the crawl space simply decided to trade its dirt floor for a collar. Some things in the woods are just wearing a disguise. They master the shape, the movement, and the sound of a living thing, but they do not fully understand the creature they are pretending to be. Mateo learned this lesson on his third day prospecting in the Cibola National Forest. 47 years old and working a solo gold claim, He had grown used to the isolation, but when a medium-sized tan dog appeared at the edge of his camp around 6 in the evening, he didn't drive it away. It approached with a friendly, submissive posture, tail wagging low. Mateo, lonely and tired, offered it a piece of jerky. She took it gently. He named her Mika. For the first few nights, Mateo welcomed the company. He let her sleep inside the small travel trailer, grateful for the warmth of another living thing. But even then, there was a friction in his mind he couldn't smooth over. It wasn't aggression. Mika was docile. It was the smell. In a landscape so arid that dead wood turned to stone rather than rotting, Mika carried a scent that didn't belong. It wasn't just the dusty odor of a coyote. It was damp. It was the thick, cloying musk of wet wool and stagnant water, like something dredged up from the bottom of a swamp. In the bone-dry air of the camp, that smell was a quiet, sensory violation. Heat became the defining struggle over the next 4 days. The sun hammered the mesa, pushing the mercury on Mateo's trailer thermometer past 95 degrees by noon. The air was a desiccant, pulling moisture from every living thing. Mateo, conscious of the brutal conditions, established a routine. He filled a stainless steel bowl with cool water and placed it in the shade for Mika. He fed her from his own supply of salted cured meats, spam, jerky, salt pork. She ate with a ravenous intensity. Mateo watched her swallow the salty meat in great, unchewed gulps. But he never saw her drink. At first, he just thought it was odd. He would check the bowl in the morning, full. He checked it at noon, full. He checked it at dusk, full. He tried to rationalize it. He told himself she must be finding puddles in the rocks. But there had been no rain for weeks. The rocks were bone dry. By the 3rd night, the behavior shifted from odd to unsettling. A mammal of that size, consuming that much sodium in blistering heat, should have been panting, desperate for hydration. Micah did none of those things. She just sat in the trailer with him, watching him with a gaze that was too steady. Night 4 brought the breaking point. Mateo lay in his bunk, awake. The air in the trailer was still and stifling. Mika was sleeping on the floor near the foot of his bed, or at least he thought she was sleeping. Then at 4:30 a.m., the sound started. Slap, slap, slap. It was close, right inside the room. A wet, flat sound, deliberate, rhythmic. Mateo froze. He turned his head slowly. The moon was high, casting a pale, milky light through the trailer's front window. Micah wasn't on the floor. She was at the window. She was standing on her hind legs. She was rigid, pressing her front paws against the glass for balance. Her back was to him, her spine straight and stiff. Slap. She was licking the glass. The temperature difference between the warm interior and the cold desert night had created a thin film of condensation on the inside of the pane. Because she wouldn't, or couldn't, drink from the bowl, she had found another way. She was harvesting the condensation, licking the moisture in long, flat strokes. Mateo lay paralyzed, watching this creature that refused to drink water, but would stand on 2 legs to lick a window. It went on for minutes. Slap, slap. Then she stopped. She dropped back down to all 4s. She didn't look at Mateo. She simply walked over to the trailer door and curled up on the rug, right against the threshold. She laid her head on her paws, staring at the bottom of the door, waiting. And then from the outside, the answer came. Scratch, 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 pause. Scratch, scratch. Mateo's blood ran cold. Micah was inside, lying on the rug. The scratching was coming from the dirt on the other side of the aluminum. It wasn't the frantic clawing of an animal. It was slow, methodical. It sounded like a code, a rhythm. Mateo looked at Mika. She didn't growl. She didn't bark. Her hackles didn't raise. She just lay there, perfectly still, her amber eyes fixed on the gap beneath the door. The scratching continued for 40 minutes, a methodical grinding sound against the metal. Mateo curled into a ball, pulling the blanket up. He was exhausted. He was confused. He just wanted the sun to come up. Only when the gray light of dawn bled through the curtains did the sound stop. Mateo waited an hour, then another. Finally, the need to get out of that box outweighed the fear. He grabbed his shotgun, hands trembling, and unlocked the door. He pushed it open. Mika stood up, stretched casually, and trotted out into the morning light. She stopped 20 feet away and turned back, looking at him with that same blank, amber stare. Mateo stepped out, his boots crunching in the dirt. He looked down at the area around the door where the scratching had come from. The dirt was churned up, but they weren't dog prints. The tracks around the door were large. The pads were elongated, the toes splayed out wide. They looked like the impressions of human hands, pressing deep into the soil, fingers dragging to create the scratching sound. He looked up at Mika. She wasn't alone. She never had been. He raised the shotgun and fired a warning shot into the air. The boom rolled across the desert like thunder. The dog didn't even blink. She just looked at him, offering a slight tilt of her head. Then, without a sound, she turned and trotted away into the shadows of the scrub brush. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She just vanished. Mateo abandoned the claim within the hour. He left the gold. He left his tools. He never talks about it, but sometimes, late at night, he reads about the legends of the Southwest. He reads about the Yi-Naldlushi, the Skinwalker. The stories say they are imperfect mimics. They can steal the shape, but they cannot steal the biology. And in this instance, the inability to drink was a flaw in the design. Mateo lives in the city now, but he never sleeps through the night. He keeps the curtains drawn tight, because sometimes when the condensation builds up on the glass, he thinks he hears it. Slap, slap, slap. A wet, rhythmic sound from the inside of the room. This desert at night is not simply dark. It is a void. On the Navajo Nation, miles from the nearest city, the blackness is heavy. It presses against the glass of your car, turning the inside of the vehicle into a small, fragile capsule of safety, floating in an endless ocean of ink. Jennifer knew this darkness well. It was a late October evening, around 7:45 p.m. The sun was long gone, leaving the air with a biting autumn chill. She was driving her SUV along Highway 160, a lonely stretch of asphalt near Tique Nos Pas that slices through the high desert. This was the routine, the mundane. She was just a real estate agent trying to get home after a long day. The rhythmic hum of her tires was the only sound in the world. Inside the cab, the heater blew a soft, steady breath of warm air. Her high beams cut a tight, bright tunnel through the night. Zip, zip, zip went the lane markers. She was cruising at 55, her mind drifting. Then, the light caught something. Up ahead, a shape emerged from the gloom on a fence post right next to the asphalt. As Jennifer drew closer, it resolved into a large red-tailed hawk. It sat motionless, barely 3 feet from the road. Jennifer lifted her foot off the accelerator. She expected the bird to spook. Wild raptors usually sense the vibration of a car and take flight. But this one did not move. It didn't flinch. It didn't even ruffle its feathers in the wind of her approaching SUV. It just sat there, chest facing the road, perfectly still. That was the first crack in the reality of the drive. The silence inside the cab seemed to deepen. Jennifer thought maybe it was injured or stunned by her lights. She rolled past slowly, only 15 feet away. That was when the bird moved. It didn't snap its head. The movement was slow, deliberate, and mechanical. The hawk began to rotate its head away from the road. The body remained frozen, facing forward, but the head kept turning. It rotated past the point of physical possibility, turning a full 180 degrees until it was facing directly backward. And then, the eyes found hers. Through the glass, the hawk's amber eyes locked onto Jennifer's face. They burned with a focused intensity. This was not the blank stare of an animal. It was steady, unblinking. It felt like a cold, calculating intelligence was looking right through the glass and into her mind. A chill raced down her spine. This was no injured bird. It was a sentinel. She pressed the accelerator, her foot heavy. As she sped past, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The hawk was still there. Its head was still tracking her, twisted now to over 200 degrees. The neck should have snapped. But the gaze remained unbroken, holding on to her as her taillights faded. She floored it to 65. She needed distance. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. "It was a trick of the light," she whispered to the empty car. "Just an optical illusion." She drove for 2 miles, her heart hammering against her ribs. She tried to convince herself the world was still rational. Then, her headlights swept over a stop sign. 2 miles down the road, perched on the metal sign, was another red-tailed hawk. It was identical to the first. But this time, there was no slow turn. This bird was already facing backward. Its body faced the darkness ahead, but its head was twisted completely around, chin resting on its spine. The amber eyes were fixed on the dark road she was driving out of. It was waiting for her. The pattern was undeniable. The first bird was the spotter. This one was the trap. This wasn't nature. This was intent. Jennifer's calm shattered. A sharp, ragged breath escaped her throat. She didn't slow down. She bore down on the wheel, aiming her heavy SUV at the space beside the sign, praying to pass the impossible sentry. She was 50 feet away when the hawk launched. It didn't fly up. It didn't fly away. It dropped from the sign and flew straight at her. It was a feathered missile aimed directly at her face. There was a split second of silence and then, crack. The impact was sickeningly heavy. It wasn't the light thump of feathers. It was a dense, wet collision. The windshield dissolved into a spiderweb of fractures directly in front of her face. The shock vibrated through the entire frame of the SUV. The wind began to whistle through the cracks, a high-pitched scream filling the cabin. Jennifer couldn't stop. Every instinct screamed at her to pull over, but a deeper terror told her that if she stopped now, she would never start again. She drove blind with panic. She kept her foot planted, the engine whining. She drove for 12 miles, the whistling wind mixing with her own frantic breathing. She didn't let up until the harsh fluorescent lights of a gas station in Mexican Hat, Utah, finally cut through the night. She pulled up to the pumps and killed the engine. She staggered out, legs like jelly, the air smelling of gasoline and dust. She dialed the police, her hands trembling. Officer Nez arrived soon after. He was a quiet, methodical Navajo officer. He walked up to the front of the SUV, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. He examined the muddy residue left by the impact on the shattered glass. But as he leaned closer, the light revealed something that froze Jennifer's blood. It wasn't a bird smudge. Pressed clearly into the mud was a handprint. It had a palm. It had 5 human fingers. Officer Nez didn't gasp. He simply moved his light, circling the vehicle in grave silence. He shone the beam onto the roof. "Come here," he said softly. Jennifer stepped forward. On the metal roof, etched deep into the paint, were scratches, thin, sharp, and deliberate. Officer Nez looked at her, his face shadowed. His voice was quiet, carrying a terrifying weight of authority. "The scratches," he said. "They say the creature watches." He didn't write a ticket. He told her to find a medicine man. He told her to have a traditional blessing performed immediately. Jennifer sold the SUV the next week. She lives in Flagstaff now, but her life is different. She never drives alone at night. The assumption that the road is just a road is gone forever. Because sometimes, when she looks out her window at the power lines, she sees them. Red-tailed hawks. They are always perched in the same manner, and their heads are always turned unnaturally, impossibly facing backward, watching, waiting.